life is complicated. Anyone who comes up with a simple formula for living or of 12 rules for life, don't listen to them.
I'm in London preparing dinner for philosopher and author Kathleen Stock.
I was deeply frustrated by academic writing. It comes out about 4 years after you wrote it, and about 5 people read it. And that's if you get it published.
A former professor and leading voice in contemporary debates on free speech, fiction, identity and philosophy, Kathleen is known for her unflinching views and intellectual rigour.
I mean, I'm annoyingly reasonable.
This is Last Meal, where I prepare the dish my guest would want if it were their last.
Kathleen, your last meal is
Ooh, that looks nice.
chicken cashew. Now, can you tell me why you selected this to be your last meal?
Well, it was tricky for me because I love food and I have lots and lots of favourite meals. And I think I overthought it, but eventually I just thought, just choose something that early on in your life you really, really liked. And I really liked chicken cashew nuts because it was my order at the local Chinese takeaway, basically. And that's what I always had. And I really, really enjoyed it. I mean, it really was just basic boiled chicken within an inch of its life. Some kind of sweetish sauce and some cashew nuts.
Yeah.
I grew up in northeast Scotland in a small town. I remember a time in supermarkets when we only had 2 kinds of cheese, red cheese and white cheese.
Like Red Leicester?
Well, they were both basically cheddars. I don't know if Red Leicester is actually a cheddar, but anyway, cheddar-like. And then sometime in the late 80s, we got brie, which no one knew how to pronounce, so everyone called it brie. And, I completely remember new ingredients arriving and it being genuinely exciting.
Yeah. Since those times, are you ever surprised at the trajectory your life has taken, where you are now?
Yes. Yes, I am. But I mean, you have to bear in mind that up until, I think it's 2 or 3 years ago, I actually can't remember. But anyway, some time in my recent past, I left my job, a job that I was set in for life, basically, as far as I knew. And I no longer teach, I no longer do philosophy research, and I had spent 19 years doing that. So yeah, that's a surprise. And now I'm a writer. I write for national publications. I've got a very well-received book. Things have gone well for me and it's been brilliant in many ways, but I certainly could never have seen it coming.
The part where you left academia, I mean, I guess closely tied to sticking to your principles to an extent.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I left because it was the culmination of a campaign against me to get me out, basically, because I kept, for several years before that, I had been talking out about the tension I saw between claims that any man who believes he's a woman is a woman and women's rights, and that's all pretty much exploded now. Certainly in the UK, I think there's some way to go in other countries as to understanding what that means. But this idea that is very popular at the moment, that like you should be free to be whichever gender you want with no consequences, or, the consequences are irrelevant to everyone else. That's just not true. In fact, there's some really severe consequences for women and girls. So I spoke out about that many times, and basically my job became impossible to do, culminating in a big kind of concerted push on the part of some activists to come to the campus every day and say that they were going to basically protest until I left. And it wasn't pleasant at all. So, yeah.
Is there anything that you regret about how that all went down?
I mean, I don't regret anything I did at all. The university had been basically useless for years because, you see, when something like this comes along and they've already, and this is not just that university, but every British university pretty much at the time, had tied its own values to transactivism very closely and had basically gone along with all the activist demands for self-ID and this invasion of women's spaces, basically, they kind of welcomed it in. So when someone like me comes along, they just don't know how to handle me. And they couldn't stick up for me. They just basically hoped it would go away, and it just wouldn't. So by the time, masked men were coming to campus making demands that I be sacked, I mean, they belatedly stood, said the right things and said they supported me. But by that point, it was completely hollow.
Damage has been done.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you feel like you're happier now with the trajectory that you're on?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was very unhappy in my workplace latterly because it was such an unpleasant place to be, given that, it wasn't just activists and people who were actively harassing me. And then there were just some very, very, very hostile colleagues, not in the philosophy department, but in other departments in quite a small university, who would just be taking to social media all the time to say what a danger I was to everybody, and what a bigot, probably a racist as well, just absolutely wild claims. And that, it's very hard to keep showing up in a workplace where you've got people like that.
Of course,
you can never say it to your face, obviously. They can only do it behind keyboards.
Yeah. But it's amazing how much pressure we'll put up with as human beings, before we actually say, all right, fuck this, I'm out.
Yeah, I was thinking I've just got to stick this out. I've just got to make it to the end of term. This will die down. But it was the union, the local branch of the union that I'd been a member of for years. I wasn't a member at that point, but only just. They came out with a statement backing the protesters, and saying that the university was guilty of institutional transphobia for employing me. And I just thought, I cannot, that's how extreme it had to get, where basically my professional colleagues were siding with masked men coming onto campus demanding that I be sacked for my perfectly legal, reasonable views. I've never said anything remotely inflammatory, or at least by normal people's lights. By their lights, I'm a total heretic.
Yeah, that's right. I thought that, you being the target of so much activism was by dint of the fact that your speech is so moderate on the issue. Yeah. And I think that, you're somebody who would be more likely to convince the average person who doesn't really concern themselves with this stuff to a moderate.
I think that might be why. I think there's something in that. I'm annoyingly reasonable on both sides. Both sides, this has become a very polarized debate, and both sides find me extremely annoyingly reasonable. And they, with the emphasis on annoying. Because I am not going to make wild pronouncements or huge, immovable demands, although I suppose I've got the immovable demand that women and girls have a system that works for them. But I do think there's a number of factors involved in why someone like me gets targeted so heavily. One of them is, she's just too potentially convincing to the other side. But also I think there's a sense that, because I am quite reasonable, they think I'm a coward, or, I haven't got much aggression about me, I don't think. I mean, I've got some passive aggression probably, but, I'm not very in your face. And I think people just think, well, they can deal with me by shutting me up.
So you said you're a lot happier now, but is a lot of it also to do with the fact that you feel like you may be doing more meaningful work now in your independent writing? Is there a sense of autonomy that you didn't have before?
I mean, it's not I wouldn't say meaning in the sort of capital M, because obviously teaching is meaningful. Yeah. And I think I was good at teaching, within reason, but I enjoyed teaching. I didn't think that part of my life was worthless at all. So I wasn't looking for something better. But it is true that in terms of writing, I was deeply frustrated by academic writing, which is, painful in a number of ways, not least that if you ever get anything published, it comes out about 4 years after you wrote it and about 5 people read it. And that's if you get it published. You have to go through torturous revisions first. The kind of writing that I do now, which is every week, I write a column in response to, I write for Unheard, and I also can be funny, or try to, which you're not allowed to do at all in academic writing. So in those ways, yeah, and you file it with your editor on a Thursday, it gets published on a Friday, and then you see in real time thousands of people interacting with it. So yeah, that's incredibly meaningful to me, and I love it.
The dichotomy between maximizers and satisficers. Have you heard of this?
Oh, sounds familiar.
Yeah,
Sounds like utilitarianism.
Yeah, it's kind of like a maximizer is almost like a perfectionist and wants to do everything perfectly all the time. And a satisficer is kind of just happy with as good as they can do in the moment. Do you think you would fall into one of these categories?
I am a satisficer.
Satisficer.
Yeah. I mean, I set myself high standards, but I don't kill myself when I don't reach them.
Okay.
Put it that way. Whereas I know perfectionists, I have some in my life, and I know that it really, really bothers them. And sometimes it actually paralyzes them. They can't even get started. So I keep my expectations for myself quite low deliberately. I've really managed, I think, developed a way of managing sometimes quite difficult tasks, confrontational tasks, scary tasks by a certain kind of talk I give myself, which is like, you can pull out, you don't have to do this, it'll be all right if you fail, and all the way along I tell myself that, and I always manage. So, and I'm very protective of that talk. Like, I have people will tell me, oh, you're great, you'll manage. Like, shut up. Don't put any pressure on me. And because the more my writing has got popular, and I'm doing columns for like national newspapers as well, the bigger the audience. I got highly commended in the press awards this year. The more there is a lot of pressure develops, and every week you have to come up with something new and something fresh. So I keep it all very mentally tight that it's all right, I can walk away from this. No, we'll all be dead soon, all that stuff.
And it's all like an inner self-talk, like pep talk type thing. That's how you do it. It's interesting because your main, I said, discipline is fiction, right?
It used to be, philosophy of fiction.
Yeah. I'm interested to know what you think about our life appreciation and the extent to which a lot of it is a post-rationalization of where we've come in our life. Like, so if we're satisfied with our life, let's say the trajectory, and I do this all the time with, I have a disability, but I look at it as a positive thing because it's taught me a lot of things about life. I think I've grown as a person. And I think I've had a bit of post-traumatic growth as well. But at the end of the day, I'm the author of that story I tell myself. And that sort of imbues my life with gratitude and life appreciation. I'm sure to an extent, everyone kind of does that in a way.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot in what you say. I think that clearly you can get two people who have suffered roughly the same adverse circumstances, and one person tells himself a different story about that than the other, and it makes a difference to their quality of experience. But what I sort of a bit more tentative about is whether, because there's a way of hearing that you're like, I'm in charge, I make my own luck, or I make my own story, I'm going to be happy no matter what. I don't think it's that easy. I think sometimes temperament's involved. Sometimes you just have to feel your feelings and, admit to yourself that this situation is objectively shit. And I would think there'd be a way of doing it where you'd be a bit pathological, everything's fine. And that wouldn't be healthy either. So I think there's probably an interplay between reality and positivity. And I'm not a particularly positive person either. So I cannot say that I, have made a huge effort to tell myself a sort of upbeat story about what's happened to me. But nonetheless, one has emerged, actually. So there you go. I mean, I think I've been lucky.
Okay, what makes for a life well lived?
Well, I think the general thing I look for is balance. And that means, that you've got lots and lots of competing interests in your life, perhaps, or complementary interests. You've got different values, different desires, different people, and somehow trying to leave what doesn't serve you and attend to what does. Yeah. So some kind of richness.
What kind of advice would you give to somebody who may be in the trap of being a bit myopic in what they're thinking, but that by dint of the fact that they actually can't see outside?
Yeah, I know, it's tricky, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, all I can, some of the things that feel like saying, you know, there's no way I could defend them rationally, but, you know, gut. I think the gut is your second brain. I really do. I don't know whether there's any objective evidence for that, but I think that people, when they're off track, often know that they are. You know, if they know that they might be getting lots and lots of stimulation out of some particular path, but they might know that there's things that they're missing, or that they feel uneasy in some way, and you feel it.
I think the internet itself is just designed to do the opposite to what you're saying.
That will, I mean, quite often I end up in a position with the internet where I don't feel good.
Yeah.
You know, and I can feel I'm sort of trapped increasingly with a sense of almost physical unease.
Yeah.
Like at the content that's going into my brain, but still I'm getting something out of it because I'm getting stimulation, and I'm maybe even getting validation in some ways. You know, I've like quite a big Twitter following. But it doesn't feel right. And then you have to kind of listen to that and get out for a bit.
Have you ever written something like an article or whatever, and then years later you've changed your mind on it, or you hate something that you wrote, critical of yourself in any way?
Yes. I mean, I'm sure that the stuff I wrote as a philosopher that I didn't agree with, even possibly at the time. I mean, the thing about philosophy, academic philosophy as practice, is that you find your line, and it's got to, you know, it's got to be original, and it's got to fit sort of in certain clever ways with the existing literature. And it's more about hitting those marks than necessarily believing it. You're just kind of trying out an argument, seeing how it works. You don't have to believe it. And I'm sure that I've done that. But I think more recently, because the writing I do now is quite satirical sometimes, and critical, and people enjoy, you know, me having a go at a politician, or reviewing a book, sometimes, you know, quite critically. Do I regret? I mean, I have feelings sometimes, because I do know when you write a book, it's extremely difficult to get a bad review, especially one that kind of takes the piss, as I sometimes do with some, you know, I know where the weak points are, and I know how to find them. That, you know, I don't know how I feel about that about myself. Partly I just think, fuck it, just do it. That's your job. But the world needs critics. The world needs, we can't all be nice to each other. If you put something out into the world, you just have to be resilient enough to take the flack. And of course, the other side is that when I write things, people can criticize me. So yeah, all I'm willing to concede is I feel sometimes uneasy about shooting the darts as kind of I do sometimes in my writing.
Do you think that you've been made more charitable or open-minded to other writers, having published books now? No? That's a great answer. Okay, what if there was one thing that you could change about the world, or about what people think, by the end of your life?
Well, I can't, you know. I'm sorry, but you know.
No, I know you can't do it.
I know I can't, but I don't like to think. So if I could,
you don't like hypotheticals.
I don't mind hypotheticals, but I just sort of, part of the way I look at the world is try and take it as it is, and it's a messy. We're doomed, you know. I've got I have no optimism, and I'm not a utopian or a progressive even that thinks that like we're on this moral arc towards justice or whatever. I think we're very, very messy. Human beings are completely out of whack. But this idea of balance, and when you see certain communities or individuals or countries becoming obsessed with one very narrow goal, outcome, and as social media makes it all worse, you know, the social network that we're all in now exacerbates those tribal tendencies, then obviously I think that would, I think tribalism is nearly always damaging, but it's the downside of being sociable. You know, it's to be the downside of having friends is having tribes. And I'm not sure we can take away one bit of our social nature without...
Yeah, got to take the good with the bad. Would you say that you're an introvert or an extrovert?
Introvert.
Yeah. Strictly introvert?
Yeah, I have to go off and recharge after things like this.
Well, sorry for sucking your energy. Hopefully we can give you some back with your last meal. Is there something that you know you do differently to everyone else?
I can go for weeks without talking to people quite happily.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, in my life, I don't, because I have family and I have dependents and things I need to do. But yeah, I don't seek out people. I'm not saying it's a particularly good thing about me, but I think it has its strengths and weaknesses. One of the strengths is that I am able to see the downside of the social stuff. I'm actually nervous of any kind of group behavior, personally.
And that's, I mean, you, like me to an extent, was sort of inducted into a community to which you weren't really invited. I mean, there's
What, are you talking about the dissident community?
No, I wasn't. I was talking about, for you, the LGBT community.
Oh, that community, right.
And apparently for me, the disabled community,
Right, okay.
which I've never heard of.
They're not really communities, are they?
Really
The word community, that's one thing I would like to do.
Yeah.
Get rid of the word community, or at least start using it in correct context.
Yeah. Okay, well, what would be the correct context?
Well, people that actually met face to face and had some kind of common goal, like living together, maybe alongside each other, socializing together, working together. You know, that starts to be a community. A bunch of people on the internet who've never met each other, who don't even know each other's names, ages, or where they live, and who come from different parts of the globe is not a community.
Mm. And I think, the sine qua non of that would be that they elect to be in the community.
Yes, and I'm not sure that you can. That's the thing. I mean, the thing about community is that it's kind of, you inherit social bonds, and you can't, same as a family, you can't, I mean, liberalism tells us you can opt out, you can go off and find your own family, but it's not, you can't choose your own family. That's the whole point of family.
Yeah.
You take the rough with the smooth, you deal with difficult characters, you have to, living in a community is an art, and it's quite difficult and requires certain skills that we are losing because precisely we're not in that sort of relationship with each other. The sort of relationship we are in is that we can opt in and we can opt out really easily. And we think in terms of individualism rather than like what's good for the group.
Yeah. Is there a lesson that, had you learnt it earlier, would have changed your life?
I think I spent a huge amount of my young life, and actually probably into my 30s, being really self-conscious, like super self-conscious, feeling like everyone was looking at me, thinking that, the mistakes I made or the things I said were being scrutinized in other people's minds as much as they were being scrutinized in mine, even, just classic. Lots and lots of people feel like that, especially young people and young women. So at one point, I do remember my dad saying to me, we were having an argument, and he said, it's not all about you, and I hadn't thought of it in those terms. It is a kind of narcissism in a way. It's a young narcissism. It's the narcissism you normally think that you're strutting about, but actually you can feel miserable but still think everybody's obsessed with you. And I realized that they weren't obsessed with me, and it was such a relief.
Yeah.
And I think if I'd realized that earlier, also confidence, I had no confidence. And now I realize that almost any situation, just walk into it like you know what you're doing, even if you don't. But life is just too short to lie in bed worrying about what you said, what you did, how drunk you were, what they think. And it's not that I don't care what anyone else thinks, but I just sort of come to the conclusion they're probably too busy worrying about themselves. I'm just not that interesting. And that was a big relief to me to realize.
It was a relief.
Not that I had sort of thought I was that interesting, but when it was spelled out for me, you are just not that interesting. I felt free.
Yeah. Nobody cares about your life as much as you do.
Yeah,
just that one
true.
thing. Had I known it earlier, I would have taken a lot more risks, I
Right.
think.
Right, really?
Yeah, I think so. And I would.
Why weren't you taking the risk?
It's an interesting question. I don't know, because I think it was like a self-confidence issue, or just what would be the best way to describe it? Just not thinking that you're good enough for any situation. I remember being in the music industry, but didn't want to play live in front of people. I didn't think I was good enough. I didn't want to write, everybody's going to be critiquing me.
You think, what's the worst that can happen here? The worst that can happen here is that nobody likes my music or nobody likes my article. How bad would that be? It wasn't that bad.
What is the most sensible thing you've ever heard anyone say?
I really like Aristotle's perspective on how to balance many different things in your life that are good, that lead to human flourishing. And basically the idea is there's no rules. So anyone who gets sort of hung up on utilitarianism or any other kind of like simple guide for life, it won't work. Life is complicated. You need to be, it's more like an art than a science. So that sort of idea of like, you need to work out the right response for the right reasons, and you can't use a guidebook to get there. You're just going to have to figure it out.
And be less dogmatic about things.
Yeah, exactly. Like be open, be flexible, listen to your gut, all that stuff. And just anyone who comes up with a simple formula for living or a few rules, 12 rules for life, don't listen to them.
Okay. Well, Kathleen, thank you for being on Last Meal. Really appreciate it. Let's eat.
Let's see.
Kathleen's strength lies in her steadfast commitment to reason and balance, even when it's easier to bend, but to my mind also her affable and measured nature. Listening to her reminded me of the courage it takes to stand by one's convictions in a world quick to judge but often slow to listen. And that's all from me.